Single dad bandaged a stranger's wounds. The man's tattoo revealed why witnesses ran away. But the moment that trembling stranger lifted his shirt, the dad realized he hadn't rescued a victim. He'd uncovered the terrifying mark everyone else knew to fear, and the truth behind it would shatter the whole town. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the Tennessee downpour. Daniel Mercer gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup truck, his knuckles white as he peered through the gray curtain of rain. The late afternoon light was fading fast, making visibility even worse. His mind wandered to the stack of bills waiting at home. The small carpentry job he'd just finished would help, but not enough. The electric company's final notice glared at him in his mind's eye, its red letters a constant worry. Grace needed new shoes for school, and her science club dues were coming up. His daughter never complained, but he noticed how she'd started wearing her old sneakers long after they'd started falling apart. A flash of lightning illuminated the rural road ahead, followed by a low rumble of thunder. The storm matched his mood, dark and turbulent. Today marked 5 years since Sarah's passing. 5 years of raising Grace alone, of empty spaces in their lives that could never be filled. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered to the empty passenger seat. "I'm trying my best." The rain drummed harder on the roof of the truck. Through the blur of water on his windshield, Daniel caught sight of the old Miller's gas station, or what was left of it. The building had been abandoned for years, its rusty sign hanging crooked, windows boarded up. He'd driven past it hundreds of times, but something was different today. A shadow moved behind the station. Daniel squinted, slowing the truck slightly. Lightning flashed again, and this time, he saw it clearly. A figure stumbling out from behind the decrepit building. The person wavered on their feet, taking unsteady steps toward the road. "What in the world?" Daniel murmured, easing his foot onto the brake pedal. The figure suddenly lurched forward, collapsing onto the wet asphalt. Daniel's heart leaped into his throat as he slammed on the brakes, the truck's tires fighting for grip on the slick road. The vehicle came to a stop just yards from where the person lay motionless in the rain. Daniel's hands trembled as he threw the truck into park and grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment. Grace's voice echoed in his head from countless true crime shows she watched. "Never stop for strangers, Dad. It could be a trap." But he couldn't drive away. What if someone was truly hurt? Sarah would never have forgiven him for leaving someone in need. The rain soaked through his jacket as he stepped out of the truck, keeping the headlights trained on the fallen figure. "Hello?" he called out, approaching cautiously. "Are you okay?" The person, a man, Daniel could now see, stirred slightly. Blood mixed with rainwater beneath him, creating pale red rivulets that ran toward the road's shoulder. The man's clothes were soaked and muddy, and a dark stain spread across his side. "Help!" the man whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. His face was pale, eyes unfocused as they found Daniel's. "Please." Daniel's heart raced, but years of handling emergencies as a father kicked in. "Try not to move," he said, keeping his voice steady despite his rising panic. "I've got a first aid kit in my truck." He jogged back to the pickup, yanking open the passenger door. The kit was where it always was, tucked under the seat. A habit he developed after Grace had fallen off her bike one too many times as a child. Lightning flashed overhead as he hurried back to the injured man, illuminating the scene in stark white for a split second. The man's breathing was shallow, his shirt torn on one side. Daniel knelt beside him, trying to shield him from the worst of the rain as he opened the first aid kit. His hands moved automatically, pulling out gauze and antiseptic wipes. "I'm going to take a look at that wound, okay?" Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "Can you tell me your name?" Before the man could answer, thunder cracked violently overhead, causing him to flinch and let out a pained gasp. Daniel steadied him with a careful hand on his shoulder, rain running down his face as he began to examine the injury. The storm raged on around them, but Daniel remained focused on the task at hand, just as he had learned to stay focused through all of life's storms. How much this man must be hurting, lying here in the cold rain, Daniel thought. He understood pain, physical and otherwise. He lived with it every day, carried it in his bones like the arthritis that plagued him after long days of work. But seeing someone else suffer always struck a deeper chord in him. The wound looked serious, too serious for his basic first aid skills, but he had to try something. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away, and in this weather, an ambulance would take too long to reach them. Daniel's mind raced through his options as he pressed clean gauze against the man's side. Rain continued to pour down, soaking through Daniel's clothes, but he barely noticed. His focus remained on the injured man, whose eyes now squeezed shut against another wave of pain. The thunder rolled again, closer this time, and Daniel could feel the vibration in his chest. He thought of Grace waiting at home, probably worried about him in this weather. She'd understand why he was late, though. She was so much like her mother that way, always putting others first, always willing to help someone in need. The thought gave him strength as he continued his efforts to help the stranger before him. The first aid kit lay open beside them, its contents carefully organized, Sarah's influence, from when she'd helped him pack it years ago. "Always be prepared," she used to say. "You never know when someone might need help." She'd been right about so many things. Daniel's fingers worked carefully but quickly, his movements deliberate despite the rain and fading light. The man's breathing had steadied somewhat, but his skin felt cold to the touch. Time was running out to make a decision about what to do next. Thunder cracked again, startlingly close this time, and the man winced in pain, his body tensing under Daniel's hands. The storm was getting worse, and they were both soaked to the bone. Daniel knew he had to act fast, but the weight of the decision pressed heavy on his shoulders, just like all the other decisions he'd had to make alone these past 5 years. Thunder boomed overhead as Daniel assessed the situation. The man's clothes were completely soaked, and blood mixed with rainwater on the asphalt beneath him. This was no place to help someone who was hurt. "Sir, I'm going to move you under that awning," Daniel said, raising his voice over the storm. "We need to get you out of this rain." The stranger managed a weak nod. Daniel carefully hooked his arms under the man's shoulders and began to drag him toward the abandoned gas station's covered area. The man wasn't particularly heavy, but his waterlogged clothes made the task harder. Daniel's boots slipped on the wet pavement as he struggled to maintain his grip. Once under the rusty metal awning, Daniel propped the injured man against the building's weathered wall. The sound of rain drumming on metal filled the space, but at least they were sheltered from the downpour. Dim light filtered through the grimy windows of the old station, providing just enough visibility to work. "I've got a first aid kit," Daniel said, keeping his voice calm and steady. "I need to take a look at where you're hurt." The stranger's eyes were half closed, his breathing labored. Daniel retrieved the kit from where he'd set it down and unzipped it with practiced movements. Years of working with tools had taught him to keep medical supplies close at hand. "Can you tell me your name?" Daniel asked as he pulled out gauze pads and antiseptic wipes. The man's only response was a pained grunt. His shirt was plastered to his body, and dark blood had spread across his left side. Daniel carefully began peeling the fabric away from the wound. That's when he saw it. The tattoo sprawled across the man's chest and disappeared under his shirt. An intricate design of thorn vines wrapped around what appeared to be a stylized snake. Daniel had seen enough news reports to recognize gang symbols, and this one made his stomach turn. It was the mark of the Vipers, one of the most notorious criminal organizations in the state. Daniel's hands froze for a moment. His mind flashed to Grace, waiting at home with Mrs. Rodriguez, their elderly neighbor. He thought about all the reasons he should get back in his truck and drive away. But the man groaned in pain, and Daniel's conscience wouldn't let him leave. He'd made a choice to stop and help. The tattoo didn't change the fact that this was a human being who needed aid. As he cleaned around the wound, a deep gash that looked like it might have come from a knife, Daniel noticed something else. Fresh tire tracks cut through the mud near the gas station, at least 2 different sets. Others had stopped here recently, and they'd left in a hurry, their tires spinning hard enough to leave deep grooves in the wet ground. Now he understood. They'd seen the tattoo too. They'd made the choice he was struggling not to make. The wound wasn't as bad as it had first appeared. Once Daniel cleaned away the blood, he could see it would need stitches, but wasn't life-threatening. He applied pressure with clean gauze pads and began wrapping a bandage around the man's torso. "This is temporary, Daniel," explained, working efficiently. "You need proper medical attention. I can drive you to the hospital." The man's hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing Daniel's wrist. His eyes were fully open now, filled with a desperate intensity that made Daniel's pulse quicken. "Please." The stranger's voice shook, either from cold or fear. Maybe both. "Do not call the police." Daniel held very still, conscious of the iron grip on his wrist and the growing realization of just how complicated this situation had become. The rain continued to hammer against the awning, and lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the abandoned gas station in brief, harsh bursts of light. Each flash seemed to highlight the choices before Daniel, the morally simple path of calling authorities versus the murky waters of getting further involved with whatever trouble this man was mixed up in. The stranger's fingers remained locked around Daniel's wrist, trembling but insistent as thunder rolled. Across the darkening sky, rain hammered against the old gas station's metal awning as Daniel helped the injured man to shelter. His hands were steady despite his racing thoughts, years of home repairs having taught him to stay calm in tense situations. Water dripped from both their clothes, forming small puddles on the cracked concrete. "I need to check that wound properly," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. The first aid kit lay open beside them, its contents neatly arranged. The stranger's eyes darted around, watching the empty road. His breathing was ragged, but he seemed more afraid than hurt. "My name is Eli," he said softly. "Eli Navarro." Daniel nodded, focusing on cleaning the gash on Eli's arm. "I'm Daniel Mercer." He tried to ignore the threatening tattoo that spread across Eli's chest, visible through his wet shirt. "This cut isn't too deep, but it needs proper medical attention." "I just left the hospital," Eli said, wincing as Daniel applied antiseptic. "That's where this all started." Lightning flashed, illuminating Eli's face. In that brief moment, Daniel saw something that made him pause. Not menace, but a bone-deep weariness and fear. "What happened?" Daniel asked, carefully applying a bandage. Eli's words came out in a rush. "I was at the convenience store near the hospital. This man, he was threatening a woman outside. I stepped in, tried to stop him. He swallowed hard. We fought, I got hurt, but so did he. The woman called the police, but when they arrived, his voice trailed off. They assumed you were the attacker," Daniel finished, understanding dawning. "Because of how I look. The tattoo." Eli's hand unconsciously moved to his chest. "They took me to the hospital first, got me checked out. When they finally listened to the woman and realized I'd helped her, they let me go. But then," he shuddered, "the man's friends were waiting outside. They chased me here." Daniel sat back on his heels, studying Eli's face. The story seemed unlikely, yet something in Eli's eyes spoke of sincerity. Before he could respond, his phone rang. Grace's name flashed on the screen. "Dad?" His daughter's voice was tight with worry. "The power's out. The storm. It's really bad here. Are you okay?" Daniel asked immediately, tension creeping into his voice. "I'm fine, just scared. When are you coming home?" Daniel looked at Eli, who was watching him with desperate hope. The rational part of his mind screamed about the risks, bringing a stranger home, especially one with gang tattoos. But another part of him remembered all the times others had judged him when he'd fallen on hard times after his wife's death, how those quick assumptions had stung. "Listen carefully, Grace," he said into the phone. "Go to the kitchen drawer where we keep the flashlights. There are fresh batteries in there too." "Already did that," she replied. And despite his worry, pride flickered in his chest at her resourcefulness. "That's my girl. I'm on my way home now, okay? Should be there in 20 minutes. "Okay, please hurry." Daniel ended the call and turned to Eli. "My daughter's alone at home," he said carefully. "I need to get back to her." "I understand," Eli said quietly, already trying to push himself up. "Thank you for helping me this much." The defeat in Eli's voice struck something in Daniel's heart. He thought of his late wife, how she'd always said that true character showed in the choices people made when helping others was difficult or scary. "Wait," Daniel said, making his decision. "I can't leave you here in this storm. My truck's just over there. Can you walk?" Relief and gratitude washed over Eli's face. "Yes, thank you. I swear you won't regret this." Daniel helped Eli to his feet, supporting him as they made their way through the rain to his truck. "I'm trusting you," he said firmly as he helped Eli into the passenger seat. "Don't make me regret that trust." "I won't," Eli promised, his voice thick with apacetic emotion. "I know what it means, taking a chance on someone when others wouldn't." As Daniel started the engine, wipers beating furiously against the rain, he pulled out his phone and called Grace again. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm on my way now." "The power's still out," she reported, "but I found the battery-powered lantern in the garage." "Good thinking. Listen, I'm bringing someone with me. He's hurt and needed help." There was a pause on the line. "Like Mom would have done," Grace said softly. Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, like Mom would have done." He glanced at Eli, who was staring straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. "We'll be there soon." As they drove through the storm, Daniel wondered if he'd made the right choice. But when he thought about the fresh tire tracks at the gas station, all those people who'd seen someone in need and driven away, he knew he couldn't have done differently. Sometimes, he realized, the right choice was also the harder one. The truck's headlights cut through the rain as they headed toward home, where Grace waited with her battery-powered lantern glowing in the dark. Thunder rolled overhead. But for now, at least, they were moving forward together. The front door burst open, and Grace rushed out, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. She wore her favorite oversized sweater, the one that had belonged to her mother, and her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. The beam of light swept across the truck's windshield. "Dad," she called out, relief clear in her voice. "The power's still out, and I was getting worried." She stopped abruptly as the light found Eli's face through the passenger window. Daniel stepped out of the truck, his work boots splashing in a puddle. "Grace, honey, everything's okay. This man needs help. He's hurt." Grace took a step back, her free hand clutching her sweater tight around herself. Daniel went around to help Eli out of the truck, supporting him with a steady arm. As they passed under the beam of Grace's flashlight, she got a better look at their unexpected guest. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something in Eli's eyes that made her pause. "Let's get him inside," Daniel said, guiding Eli toward the house. "Grace, can you grab the first aid kit from the truck?" Inside, Daniel settled Eli onto their worn but clean couch. Grace set up several battery-powered lanterns, casting the living room in a warm glow. The rain tapped gently against the windows, a stark contrast to the earlier downpour. As Daniel checked Eli's bandages, Grace stood in the doorway, her brow furrowed in concentration. Something about Eli seemed familiar, tugging at an old memory. "Wait," she said suddenly, turning on her heel and disappearing down the hallway. The sound of rustling came from her room, followed by the thud of something heavy being moved. Daniel glanced up from his work, watching as Grace returned, clutching a large photo album to her chest. The cover was worn, its corners soft from years of handling. It had been her mother's. "Mom used to tell me stories," Grace said, sitting cross-legged on the floor and opening the album. The pages made a soft crackling sound as she carefully turned them. "About when she worked at the youth center, before I was born." Daniel's hands stilled on the bandage. Sarah had loved her work at that center, dedicating years to helping troubled teens find their way. It was where they had first met when he'd volunteered to help fix the center's aging heating system. "Here!" Grace's voice pulled him back to the present. She held the album up, pointing to a group photo. The image showed about 15 teenagers standing in front of the old youth center building. Sarah stood among them, young and radiant, her smile as bright as Daniel remembered. "Look," Grace said, her finger moving to a boy standing slightly apart from the group. He was thin, with dark hair and guarded eyes, but there was the hint of a smile on his face. "Mom told me about him. His name was Eli Navarro." Eli's quiet voice finished for her. He was looking at the photo, his expression a mix of wonder and pain. "Your mother? She was Sarah Collins?" Daniel took the album with trembling hands, studying the photograph more closely. The teenage Eli in the picture was barely recognizable in the man before them, but the eyes were the same. "She married me and became Sarah Mercer," Daniel said slowly, looking up at Eli. "You knew her?" Eli nodded, wincing slightly as he shifted position. She helped me. When nobody else would." His voice was rough with emotion. "I was 16, angry at the world. She never gave up on me, even when I tried to push her away." Grace leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "Mom used to tell me about a boy who loved to draw. She said he had real talent, but he was afraid to show it." She paused, watching Eli's reaction. "That was you, wasn't it?" A look of surprise crossed Eli's face, followed by a flicker of something that might have been grief. "She remembered that?" Daniel sat back, his mind racing. The coincidence seemed almost impossible, finding this man from Sarah's past on this particular night, in these circumstances. He watched as Grace asked Eli about her mother, about the youth center, about the art classes Sarah had encouraged him to take. Eli answered each question carefully, his details matching the stories Sarah had told over the years. But Daniel couldn't shake the unease in his gut. Was this truly a chance encounter? Or was there something more calculated at work? He thought of the gang tattoo, the fresh injury, Eli's fear of the police. The rain continued its gentle rhythm against the windows as Grace pulled out more photos, each one sparking a new memory, a new story. Daniel listened, torn between hope and suspicion. watching the man who claimed to have known his wife in a different life, in better times. Through the shadows cast by the bay lanterns, Daniel studied Eli's face, searching for answers. But all he found were more questions, wrapped in the complex web of past and present, truth and uncertainty. The connection to Sarah felt real, but so did the danger that seemed to cling to Eli like a shadow. The kitchen's fluorescent light buzzed overhead as Daniel stirred a pot of tomato soup on the stove. Steam rose in gentle wisps, carrying the simple aroma through the small house. He glanced over his shoulder, watching Grace tend to Eli's wounds with careful hands at their worn dining table. "This might sting a little," Grace warned, her voice gentle as she peeled back the old bandage. Her movements were precise, just like her mother's had been. Daniel remembered how his wife would patch up neighborhood kids who got scrapes and cuts playing basketball at the youth center. Eli winced, but remained still. "You're good at this," he said softly. "Mom was a nurse," Grace replied, dabbing the wound with antiseptic. "She taught me the basics." She paused, studying his face. "You knew her, didn't you?" At the youth center, Daniel's hand tightened around the wooden spoon. He kept stirring, but his ears strained to catch every word. "I did," Eli admitted. His voice grew distant, as if reaching back through time. "I was 14 when I first met her. My family." He stopped, swallowing hard. "We didn't have much. Some days, that youth center was the only place I got a hot meal." Thunder rumbled outside, softer now, but still present. The wind whistled through a gap in the kitchen window frame that Daniel had been meaning to fix. "What happened?" Grace asked, securing a fresh bandage. "How did you end up?" She gestured vaguely at his tattoo. Daniel turned from the stove. "Grace," he cautioned, not wanting her to pry too deeply. "No, it's okay," Eli said. He pulled his borrowed shirt, one of Daniel's old ones, closer around himself. "When you're poor and scared, you make choices. Bad ones? Sometimes. You look for belonging wherever you can find it." He traced the edge of the tattoo through the fabric. "This was forced on me. It's not who I am, but it's part of my story." The overhead light flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness fell over the kitchen like a heavy curtain. "Not again." Grace sighed. Her phone's flashlight clicked on, casting sharp shadows across the walls. Daniel moved carefully through the dark kitchen, muscle memory guiding him to the drawer where they kept emergency supplies. "Grace, get the candles from the living room, please." As Grace left the kitchen, Daniel found what he was looking for, an old battery-powered lantern. He clicked it on, setting it in the center of the table. The warm light created a small circle of visibility. "I've been trying to make things right," Eli continued in the semi-darkness. "Got my GED in prison, started learning carpentry." He looked up at Daniel. "I know how this looks, a stranger with a gang tattoo showing up in the rain. But I swear, what I told you about the convenience store is true. I was trying to help." Grace returned with 3 thick candles, setting them up around the kitchen. The dancing flames cast a warm glow that somehow made the space feel both smaller and safer. Daniel ladled soup into 3 bowls, his movements deliberate as he processed Eli's words. The man's story aligned with what he remembered his wife saying about some of the teens she worked with, how poverty and desperation could push good kids down dangerous paths. "My wife," Daniel said, placing the bowls on the table, "she always believed in second chances." The words felt heavy in his mouth, weighted with memory and loss. "Sarah," Eli said quietly, "she believed in me when nobody else did. Even after I stopped coming to the center." He stared into his bowl, his reflection rippling in the soup's surface. "I heard about the accident. I was still inside when it happened. I wanted to send a letter, but..." He trailed off, the words hanging unfinished in the candlelit kitchen. Grace reached across the table and squeezed Eli's hand. The gesture was so like her mother that Daniel had to look away for a moment. The storm outside had settled into a steady drum of rain against the windows. Thunder growled in the distance, but it seemed to be moving away. The power flickered back on briefly, then died again with a quiet hum. "Dad?" Grace's voice carried a note of concern. "Do you think the roads will flood?" Before Daniel could answer, a sharp static crackle cut through the kitchen. The weather alert radio on the counter, a Christmas gift from Grace last year, suddenly sprang to life, its red indicator light blinking in the darkness. The mechanical voice broke through the quiet. "The National Weather Service has issued an emergency bulletin for the following counties." The static from the weather alert radio cut through the candlelit silence like a knife. Daniel's Hand froze mid-stir above the pot of soup as the crackling gave way to a stern female voice. "We interrupt our regular weather coverage for an important public safety announcement," the reporter declared, her tone grave. "Police are seeking a suspect in connection with a violent assault that occurred earlier today at Mason's Corner Store on Oak Street. The victim, beloved store owner Thomas Mason, age 68, was found unconscious behind the counter around 4 p.m. Grace's fingers stilled on the gauze she was wrapping around Eli's arm. The candle flames wavered as Daniel turned from the stove, his eyes fixed on Eli's face. The suspect is described as a Hispanic male in his late 30s to early 40s, approximately 5'10", with distinctive tattoos on his arms and neck, the reporter continued. He was last seen wearing dark jeans and a gray t-shirt. Residents are urged to stay inside and keep their doors locked. If you have any information about the suspect's whereabouts, please contact local law enforcement immediately. The soup began to bubble over, and Daniel quickly moved the pot off the heat. His movements were mechanical as he switched off the burner. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, more confined, as if the walls were pressing in around them. "That's not true," Eli said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. His good hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. "I swear to you, I wasn't anywhere near Mason's store today." Daniel turned to face him fully. "Then where were you?" "I told you. I was at the hospital." Eli's eyes darted between Daniel and Grace, desperation evident in his expression. "They treated me for these injuries. There will be records." "What hospital?" Daniel's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. "Memorial, downtown." Eli winced as he shifted in his chair. "I was there most of the afternoon. The doctor who treated me, Dr. Chin, she can verify everything." Grace had backed away from the table, the roll of gauze still clutched in her hands. Her face showed confusion rather than fear as she looked between her father and their guest. "Dad," she said softly, "remember the photo? Mom trusted him. That was 20 years ago, Grace." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The sound of car doors slamming outside drew him to the window. Through the Rain Street glass, he could see neighbors emerging onto their porches, phone screens glowing in the growing darkness as they peered anxiously up and down the street. Mrs. Peterson from next door stood under her porch light, speaking rapidly into her phone while pointing toward Daniel's house. The sight made his stomach clench. He'd brought this situation right to his daughter's doorstep, their only safe place in the world. "Listen to me," Eli said, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "I know how this looks. The tattoo, the description, it's exactly why I begged you not to call the police, but I'm being set up, again." He pushed himself up from the chair with visible effort. "I should go. I'm putting you both at risk by staying here." "Sit down," Daniel said firmly, surprising himself with the authority in his voice. "You're injured, and running now will only make you look guilty." He moved away from the window, his mind working through their options. "If what you're saying is true, we need to verify it. Grace, get me the phone book from the drawer." Grace hurried to comply while Daniel studied Eli's face intently, looking for any sign of deception. The man's eyes were clear despite his pain, meeting Daniel's gaze steadily. "Memorial Hospital," Daniel said as Grace handed him the phone book. "If your story checks out, we'll figure out next steps. If it doesn't," he left the threat unspoken as he began flipping through the pages. More car doors slammed outside. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the wet pavement, though no sirens wailed yet. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized patrol cars were likely setting up a perimeter around the neighborhood. They were all trapped now, him, Grace, and a man who might or might not be dangerous, all together in their small house while the net closed in around them. Through the thin walls, they could hear neighbors' voices growing louder, more insistent. The weather alert radio continued to repeat its warning, creating an eerie backdrop to the tension in the room. Daniel's hand shook slightly as he dialed the hospital's number, aware that this call could either vindicate Eli or confirm their worst fears. Grace moved closer to her father, her expression troubled but not frightened. "Dad," she whispered, "what if Mom was right about him? What if everyone else is wrong?" Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Eli, who sat still and silent, waiting. The phone rang in his ear as he struggled with the weight of his decision. Outside, the neighbors' porch lights clicked on one by one, like accusing eyes, all focused on his house. He'd wanted to do the right thing, to show compassion to someone in need. Now he wondered if that compassion had put everything he loved at risk. The line clicked as someone at the hospital picked up. Daniel's heart pounded as he prepared to speak, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. Through the window, he caught glimpses of concerned faces illuminated by the emergency lights, all turned toward his home. The rain continued to fall, trapping them all together in this moment of uncertainty and fear. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10, its deep chimes echoing through the quiet house. The rain had finally stopped, but a thick fog pressed against the windows like ghostly fingers. Daniel stood at the kitchen sink, mechanically washing the soup bowls while his mind raced with doubts. Grace sat at the worn kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. She hadn't taken her eyes off her father since the radio announcement. Eli remained in the living room, giving them space to process everything. "Dad," Grace said softly, "I know you're worried, but I really think he's telling the truth." Daniel set a bowl in the dish rack with a gentle clink. "Honey, it's not that simple. The radio said they're looking for someone matching his description," Grace interrupted, her voice taking on that stubborn tone that reminded Daniel so much of her mother. "That doesn't mean it was him." Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel and leaned against the counter. "We should call Sheriff Hawthorne. Let him sort this out." "And what if they hurt him?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Mom always said the system doesn't treat everyone fairly. She believed in Eli when he was younger. That's why she volunteered at the youth center. Remember the stories she used to tell us?" Daniel's chest tightened at the mention of his late wife. She had always seen the best in people, even when others didn't. It was one of the things he loved most about her. From the living room, they heard Eli shift on the couch, followed by a small groan of pain. The wound in his side, while not severe, clearly still bothered him. Daniel walked to the doorway and observed Eli. The man sat with his head bowed, hands clasped together, looking more defeated than dangerous. The tattoo that had initially sparked such fear was now hidden beneath one of Daniel's old shirts, a simple act of kindness that somehow made the situation even more complicated. "Mr. Mercer?" Eli spoke without looking up, his voice quiet but steady. "I understand if you need to call the police, but please believe me when I say I didn't hurt anyone. I've spent too many years trying to make up for my past mistakes to throw it all away now." Grace appeared beside Daniel, her hand slipping into his. "Dad, please, just let him stay tonight. He needs rest, and tomorrow we can figure things out better." Daniel rubbed his free hand across his tired face. The responsible thing would be to call Sheriff Hawthorne right now. But something in his gut, the same instinct that had made him stop his truck in the rain, told him to wait. The guest room upstairs, Daniel said finally, "You can stay there tonight, Eli. But I need your word that you won't try to leave, and that you won't do anything to put my daughter in danger." Eli looked up, his eyes meeting Daniel's with unwavering sincerity. "You have my word, Mr. Mercer. I swear it." Grace squeezed her father's hand in silent approval. "I'll show you up," Daniel said. He turned to Grace. "You should head to bed too, sweetheart. It's late." Grace hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered before heading upstairs. Daniel helped Eli navigate the stairs, noting how the man tried to hide his wincing. The guest room was small but clean, with a twin bed covered in one of his wife's old quilts. The fog outside made the window look like frosted glass. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold," Daniel said, his hand resting on the doorknob. "And the bathroom's right across the hall." Eli sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Thank you. I know what you're risking by helping me. I won't forget it." Daniel nodded, then stepped out into the hallway. He methodically checked every window in the house, making sure each latch was secure. He double-checked the front and back doors, turning the deadbolts with decisive clicks. In the kitchen, he paused by the phone. Sheriff Hawthorne's number was right there on the emergency contact list pinned to the bulletin board. One call would end this uncertainty, would put the responsibility in someone else's hands, but it would also end any chance of discovering the truth, whatever that might be. Daniel's footsteps seemed unusually loud as he climbed the stairs to his bedroom. He could hear Grace's soft breathing from her room across the hall, already asleep. From the guest room, there was only silence. Lying. In bed, Daniel stared at the ceiling, watching the occasional headlights from passing cars create shifting shadows. The fog outside muffled the usual nighttime sounds, making the house feel isolated from the rest of the world. He knew sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. Every creak of the old house made him tense. Each sound could be Eli moving around, could be the prelude to what? Daniel wasn't even sure what he feared more, that Eli might try to leave, or that someone might come looking for him. The decision to let Eli stay felt both right and terrifying. It was the kind of choice that would ripple outward, affecting not just tonight, but days and weeks to come. Daniel could feel the weight of it pressing down on him as he lay there in the dark, listening to his home settle into uneasy silence. He thought about Grace's faith in Eli, about his wife's long-ago belief in a troubled teenager, about the fear and pain he'd seen in Eli's eyes. Somewhere in this tangled web of past and present lay the truth. Tomorrow, they would have to start unraveling it. But for tonight, all Daniel could do was listen to the quiet and hope he'd made the right choice. The first rays of sunlight crept through Daniel's bedroom window, finding him already awake. He dozed fitfully throughout the night, jerking alert at every creak and groan of the old house. His eyes felt gritty and a dull headache pulsed behind his temples. The cheerful morning birdsong outside seemed oddly out of place given the tension that still hung over the house. Daniel pulled himself out of bed, his muscles protesting from the previous day's work and stress. He shuffled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face in an attempt to feel more alert. Down in the kitchen, Grace was already dressed for school, pouring cereal into a bowl. She looked up when Daniel entered, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "Did you sleep at all, Dad?" she asked, pushing a mug of coffee toward him. Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully. He lied, not wanting to worry her. "How about our guest?" "I haven't heard anything," Grace said, glancing toward the ceiling. "Should I check on him before I leave?" Daniel shook his head. "I'll do it. You focus on getting to school on time." Grace finished her breakfast in thoughtful silence. As she rinsed her bowl in the sink, she said, "Maybe we could bring him something to eat when I get home? He probably needs proper food to heal. Let's just get through today first." Daniel replied, touched by her compassion, but still wary of making longer-term plans. When Grace's school bus rumbled past their driveway, Daniel watched from the window until it disappeared around the corner. The morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing a clear day that seemed determined to pretend nothing unusual had happened during the night's storm. Upstairs, Daniel paused outside the guest room. After a moment's hesitation, he knocked softly. "Eli, you awake?" A quiet yes came from inside. Daniel cracked the door open. Eli was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking as tired as Daniel felt. The bandage on his side needed changing. "I need to get some groceries," Daniel said. "Will you be okay here for a bit?" Eli nodded. "I gave you my word last night. I'll stay put." Daniel headed to Morton's Market, the local grocery store that had served the community for 3 generations. As he pushed his cart through the aisles, he couldn't help but notice the unusual number of people shopping early on a weekday morning. More concerning were the whispers that seemed to follow him. Near the dairy section, Mrs. Peterson and Betty Collins, 2 longtime neighbors, huddled together behind a display of yogurt. Their conversation dropped to hushed tones as Daniel approached, but not before he caught a snippet. Dot saw someone going into the Mercer house last night. Daniel pretended not to hear, focusing intently on selecting a carton of milk. "But they're slashing it," words carried clearly in the quiet store. "In this weather, with everything that's happening?" Betty's voice trembled with barely concealed anxiety. Sarah across the street said she saw him helping someone inside, a stranger. Daniel's hand tightened on the milk carton. He could feel their stares boring into his back as he moved toward the bread aisle. There, he encountered Tom Wilson, who usually gave a friendly wave, but now quickly looked away. The tension in the store was palpable. Everyone seemed to be speaking in whispers, casting furtive glances his way. Daniel tried to shop quickly, but each aisle brought new uncomfortable encounters. At the meat counter, Mr. Morton himself, who had known Daniel for years, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Everything okay at your place, Dan?" "Heard some concerns from folks." "Everything's fine, Jim," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "People are just jumpy with all this storm damage." "Well, you know how it is," Mr. Morton continued, not meeting Daniel's eyes. "With that attack yesterday, folks are worried. They're saying the guy might be, not from around here." The implication in his tone made Daniel's stomach turn. He'd lived in this town long enough to recognize the undercurrent of prejudice that occasionally surfaced during times of stress. "I need to get home," Daniel said shortly, abandoning his half-filled cart. He couldn't stand another minute of the whispers and suspicious glances. As he hurried toward the exit, he overheard Mrs. Peterson's voice again. It's not like Daniel to make such poor choices. Ever since his wife passed, Daniel pushed through the doors into the parking lot, his cheeks burning. The drive home seemed endless, though it was only a few blocks. Every passing car, every person on the sidewalk suddenly seemed to be watching his house, judging his decisions. He pulled into his driveway, noticing how several curtains in neighboring houses twitched shut as he got out of his truck. The morning sun had burned away the last of the fog, leaving nowhere to hide from prying eyes. As he approached his front door, something white caught his attention. A piece of paper had been slipped underneath, its corner fluttering in the breeze. Daniel's heart rate quickened as he bent to pick it up. The note was brief, written in block letters. "Be careful who you let in." The late morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm squares of light across the worn linoleum floor. Daniel stood at the counter, measuring coffee grounds into the filter while stealing glances at Eli, who sat quietly at the small kitchen table. The stranger's shoulders were hunched, his bandaged arm cradled close to his body. "How's the wound feeling?" Daniel asked, pressing the brew button. The coffee maker gurgled to life. "Better," Eli replied softly. "Thank you." He traced invisible patterns on the wooden tabletop with his finger, seeming lost in thought. The coffee maker sputtered and dripped, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Daniel pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet, the one with the loose door that always squeaked. The hinge gave its familiar protest. "Been meaning to fix that," Daniel muttered, more to himself than to Eli. "I could help," Eli offered unexpectedly. "Used to do maintenance work at the youth center." He paused, then added quietly, "Where I knew your wife." Daniel set the mugs down and leaned against the counter, studying Eli. The morning light threw the dark ink on his neck into sharp relief. The question had been burning in his mind since last night. "The tattoo," Daniel said carefully. "There's more to that story, isn't there?" Eli's hand unconsciously moved to his neck, fingers brushing over the marked skin. His eyes grew distant, as if looking into a past he'd rather forget. "It wasn't by choice," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was in prison for a crime I didn't commit. Wrong place, wrong time. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough." Daniel poured the coffee, sliding one mug across the table to Eli, who wrapped his hands around it like he was seeking warmth despite the mild morning. "There was a gang inside," Eli continued. "They ran everything. One day, they wanted me to help them smuggle drugs into the prison hospital wing. I refused." He took a shaky breath. "Your wife? She taught me better than that. All those years ago at the youth center, she showed me what integrity meant." Daniel sat down across from him, the coffee forgotten. "What happened?" "They cornered me in the laundry room. 4 of them." Eli's knuckles went white around the mug, held me down. "They had a makeshift tattoo gun. Said if I wouldn't wear their colors willingly, they'd mark me as theirs anyway." His voice cracked slightly. "Make sure everyone who saw me would know I belonged to them, even though I didn't." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Daniel felt the weight of Eli's words settle in his chest, understanding dawning about why the man had been so desperate not to be judged by that mark. "How long were you in?" Daniel asked softly. 3 years. Got out early when they found evidence clearing me." Eli finally took a sip of his coffee. "But the tattoo, it stayed, like a permanent sentence. People see it and assume the worst, run away, like at that gas station yesterday." Daniel remembered the fresh tire tracks in the mud, the people who had driven away rather than help a bleeding man. His own initial fear and hesitation felt shameful now. "I've tried to have it removed," Eli continued. "But laser removal is expensive, and no one wants to hire someone who looks like," he gestured vaguely at his neck. "So I'm stuck, marked for life by other people's cruelty." Daniel stood up and walked to the squeaky cabinet, opening and closing it thoughtfully. "You said you know how to fix this?" Eli looked up, surprise flickering across his face at the sudden change in topic. "Yes, just needs new hinges and proper alignment. Tools are in the garage," Daniel said, "if you're feeling up to it." A small smile touched Eli's lips, the first Daniel had seen. "Least I can do." They spent the next hour working on the cabinet. Daniel watched as Eli's skilled hands removed the old hinges, adjusted the door, and installed new hardware from Daniel's supplies. His movements were precise and careful, showing years of experience. "Your wife," Eli said as he tightened the last screw, "she believed in second chances. Said everyone deserves the opportunity to prove who they really are, not who others think they are." Daniel thought about Sarah, about her unwavering faith in people's capacity for good, how she would have handled this situation. She was right about that. The front door opened and Grace's footsteps echoed in the hallway. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her eyes went first to Eli, then to the now perfectly aligned cabinet door. "You fixed it," she said, a small smile spreading across her face as she watched Eli carefully test the door's smooth swing. "Your friend here knows his way around tools," Daniel said, noting how Grace's presence seemed to ease some of the tension from Eli's shoulders. Grace set her backpack down and moved closer to inspect the repair. "Mom always said you were good at fixing things," she said to Eli. "She kept that old photo of you building shelves at the youth center." Eli's hand stilled on the cabinet door. "She kept that?" Grace nodded, and in that moment, Daniel saw something shift in the room. A subtle strengthening of the fragile trust between them, built on the foundation of Sarah's enduring belief in second chances. The cabinet door closed with a soft, solid click. No squeak, no protest. Just as it should be. Afternoon sunlight poured through the living room windows, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, her math textbook open but forgotten beside her. Eli had settled into the old armchair, his injured arm resting carefully on the padded armrest. "They called me thrift store girl again today," Grace said quietly, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. The denim was faded, but clean and carefully mended. "Jenny Martinez saw the price tag I forgot to remove from my sweater. She made sure everyone knew it came from the discount rack." Eli shifted in his chair, his expression softening as he watched her. "Kids can be cruel when they're scared," he said. Grace looked up, confusion crossing her face. "Scared? Of what?" "Of being different themselves. Of not fitting in." Eli leaned forward slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandage. "When I was your age, I wore the same 3 shirts to school all year. Kids noticed." "They always notice." Grace's eyes widened with recognition. "What did you do?" "At first, I got angry. Started fights." He shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That just proved them right about me being trash. Made things worse." In the hallway, Daniel paused on his way to the kitchen, listening. He stayed hidden behind the doorframe, not wanting to interrupt the moment unfolding between them. "Your mom? She was one of the first people who saw past all that," Eli continued. "At the youth center, she taught me something important. Want to know what it was?" Grace nodded eagerly, scooting closer to the armchair. "She said our worth isn't in what we wear or what's in our wallet. It's in how we treat others, especially when they're unkind to us." Eli's voice grew stronger, more certain. "Those kids making fun of you? They're showing their own weakness, not yours." "But it still hurts," Grace admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course it does. Pain is real, but so is strength." Eli leaned back in the chair, considering his next words carefully. "You know, what I see when I look at you, Grace?" She shook her head. "I see someone who helps her dad without being asked. Someone who showed kindness to a stranger when others wouldn't. That's real wealth right there." Grace's shoulders straightened slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Mom used to say something like that, about how being rich in heart matters more than being rich in stuff." "Your mom was wise," Eli said softly. "She helped me understand that when I was about your age, I was so angry back then, felt so worthless, because we were poor. But she showed me how to find dignity in doing what's right, not in what I owned." From his hiding spot, Daniel felt his throat tighten. Sarah had never told him about Eli specifically, but he remembered how passionate she'd been about her work at the youth center, about giving kids hope and purpose. "Sometimes," Grace confessed, "I get mad at kids like Jenny. I want to say mean things back." "That's natural," Eli nodded. "But you know, what's stronger than getting even? Rising above it. When people expect you to break, stand tall instead. That really throws them off." Grace laughed, a genuine sound that filled the room. "Is that what you do now?" "Try to." Eli's face grew serious. "Life's given me plenty of chances to practice. When people see this," he gestured to his tattoo, "they make assumptions, judge me before knowing me, but I choose not to let their fear define who I am." "Like how you helped that woman at the store," Grace said. "Even though people might think wrong about you." Eli nodded slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing means people might misunderstand, but that doesn't make it any less right." Daniel watched as his daughter absorbed these words, seeing something shift in her expression, a new understanding taking root. The afternoon light caught the tears in her eyes, but they weren't sad tears anymore. "You know what else your mom taught me?" Eli continued, his voice gentle. "She said every bide, Person has a light inside them. When times get dark, that light shines brightest. I see that light in you, Grace. Grace wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smiling. Thanks, Eli. I think Mom would be glad you're here. Daniel chose that moment to step into the room, pretending he'd just arrived. The scene before him, his daughter's tear-streaked but peaceful face, Eli's protective posture, stirred something in his heart. Despite his lingering concerns, he couldn't deny the positive change this stranger was bringing to their home. Hey, he said softly, how about we all have dinner together? I was thinking of making Sarah's old recipe for chicken and rice. Grace's face lit up. Really? We haven't had that in ages. I'd be honored, Eli said quietly, understanding the significance of the invitation. The late afternoon sun painted the walls in warm amber tones as they moved toward the kitchen together. Three people brought together by circumstance, but connected by something deeper. The legacy of a woman who had taught them all about the power of seeing past surfaces to the light within. The clink of dishes and running water filled the kitchen as Grace methodically washed the dinner plates. Steam rose from the sink, fogging the window above it that looked out into the darkening yard. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, his laptop casting a blue glow across his tired face. The evening had settled into a peaceful, quiet, broken only by the gentle domestic sounds of cleanup. You don't have to do all those by yourself, Daniel called to Grace, glancing up from his screen. I can help. It's okay, Dad, Grace replied, scrubbing at a stubborn spot on a plate. You cooked. Besides, it helps me think. Daniel smiled softly at his daughter's maturity, then turned back to his laptop. He'd been scanning local news sites for the past 20 minutes, trying to piece together more information about the store owner's assault. Most articles repeated the same. Vague details. An attack at dusk, a tall man in a dark jacket, the victim still recovering in the hospital. A new post caught his eye. The local police department's social media page had just updated with fresh evidence. Daniel clicked the link, leaning closer to the screen. His heart began to race as he studied the grainy security camera image that filled his display. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m. the previous evening. The photo captured a figure outside the Save Quick Gas and Market, where the assault had taken place. The man wore a jacket similar to Eli's, dark, with a distinctive collar, but something wasn't right. Daniel enlarged the image, squinting at the details. Grace, he called, his voice tense with concentration. Can you come look at something? Grace dried her hands on a dish towel and walked over, peering over her father's shoulder. What is it? Look at this person, Daniel said, pointing to the screen. Really look at them. The figure in the image was caught, mid-stride, heading toward the store's entrance. Even in the poor quality of the security footage, certain details were clear. The man was notably tall, towering over the marked height measurements on the doorframe. And there was something else. His gait was distinctly uneven. He's limping, Grace observed, touching the screen lightly. And he's way taller than Eli. Daniel nodded slowly, his mind racing. Eli, who was sleeping in the guest room, couldn't have been more than 5'9". The man in the image had to be at least 6'2". And Eli, despite his injury, had shown no sign of a limp when walking. Look at the timestamp, Daniel murmured, more to himself than Grace. According to Eli's story, he'd been at the hospital at that exact time, getting treatment for injuries he'd received while trying to help someone. If this image showed the real attacker, it would prove Eli was telling the truth. Daniel opened another tab and searched for the hospital's phone number. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his next move. Making inquiries about a patient might violate privacy rules, but he needed to verify Eli's story. Dad, Grace said softly, putting her hand on his shoulder. Are you going to tell Sheriff Hawthorne? Daniel rubbed his tired eyes. I need to. This could clear Eli's name. He looked at the printer sitting on the corner desk, its power light blinking steadily. But first, I need proof that can't disappear with a click. He connected to the printer and carefully saved the image, making sure to capture the timestamp and all relevant details. The printer hummed to life, producing a clear copy of the security camera screenshot. Daniel held it under the kitchen light, studying it again. The sheriff needs to see this, he said firmly. First thing tomorrow morning. Grace finished drying the last plate and put it away. Do you think he'll believe it? He has to at least investigate it, Daniel replied. This is evidence that the real attacker is still out there. He slipped the printed image into a manila envelope and wrote the date and time on the outside. Tomorrow, he would take it to the sheriff's office and hopefully start the process of clearing Eli's name. For now, though, the truth was safely captured on paper, waiting to be revealed. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall as Daniel powered down his laptop. Through the window, crickets had begun their evening chorus, a peaceful contrast to the tension of the past 24 hours. A small hope had taken root. Perhaps justice would prevail after all. "We should get some sleep," Daniel said, standing and stretching his stiff muscles. "Tomorrow's going to be an important day." Grace nodded, hanging the dish towel to dry. The stack of clean plates gleamed in the dish rack, a small symbol of order in their currently chaotic world. Daniel carefully placed the envelope in his work bag, where it would be safe until morning. Outside, a car drove, past slowly, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen walls. Daniel watched through the window until it disappeared around the corner, then double-checked that the doors were locked. The house settled into nighttime, quiet, with only the soft whir of the refrigerator breaking the silence. The kitchen light cast a warm glow as Daniel and Grace prepared for bed, each lost in their own thoughts about what the morning might bring. The evidence was clear, but would it be enough? Daniel touched the envelope in his bag one last time before heading upstairs, knowing that tomorrow could change everything. In the guest room, Eli slept peacefully, unaware that proof of his innocence had been discovered. The truth was finally coming to light, captured in a single grainy image that could help restore his freedom. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows, casting warm squares of light across the worn linoleum floor. Daniel stood at the counter, packing Grace's lunch while she finished getting ready for school upstairs. The printed security camera image lay on the table, its grainy black and white contents potentially holding the key to Eli's freedom. "Got everything you need?" Daniel called up the stairs, zipping the worn lunch bag closed. Grace appeared at the top of the stairs, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Yeah, Dad? Are you really going to talk to Sheriff Hawthorne today?" Daniel nodded, picking up his truck keys from the hook by the door. "That's the plan." This picture might help clear things up. In the living room, Eli sat quietly on the couch, his bandaged wound looking better after a night's rest. His eyes held a mix of hope and wariness as he watched Daniel gather his things. "I appreciate what you're doing," Eli said softly. "Not many would take this risk for someone like me." Daniel paused, keys jingling in his hand. "Someone like you deserves the same chance as anyone else. Just stay inside today, all right? Rest up." Grace hurried down the stairs and, to everyone's surprise, gave Eli a quick hug before heading to the door. "It'll work out. You'll see." The morning air was crisp as Daniel and Grace walked to his truck. Dew sparkled on the grass, and birds called from the trees lining their modest street. A few neighbors were already out, walking dogs or retrieving newspapers, and Daniel noticed their sideways glances. "Have a good day at school, kiddo," Daniel said as he dropped Grace off. She waved goodbye, disappearing into the stream of students entering the building. The drive to the sheriff's office felt longer than usual. Daniel rehearsed what he would say, how he would present the evidence. The printed image sat on the passenger seat, its presence both reassuring and nerve-wracking. The sheriff's office was a small brick building with American flags flanking the entrance. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Daniel approached the front desk. The familiar smell of coffee and paper filled the air. "Morning," the desk sergeant said. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak with Sheriff Hawthorne. It's about the convenience store assault case." Minutes later, Daniel sat across from Sheriff Hawthorne in his office. The sheriff's expression was neutral but guarded as Daniel explained his discovery. "Look at the security footage screenshot," Daniel said, sliding the paper across the desk. "The suspect has a clear limp, and he's much taller than Eli Navarro." Sheriff Hawthorne picked up the image, studying it carefully. His weathered face revealed nothing as he compared it to the official case file on his desk. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice measured. "It was posted on the local news website. Anyone can access it." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Sheriff, I know Eli's appearance makes people uncomfortable, but that tattoo? It wasn't his choice. He was marked against his will." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Mercer, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. We'll review the footage again and compare it with our evidence. But I have to ask, why are you so invested in this case?" Daniel thought about Grace's mother, about the youth center where she had once helped Eli, about second chances and judgment. Because sometimes what seems obvious isn't the whole truth. After a long moment, Sheriff Hawthorne nodded slowly. "I'll look into it." That's all I can promise for now. Relief washed over Daniel as he left the sheriff's office. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. The morning sun had risen higher, warming his face as he walked to his truck. When he pulled into his driveway an hour later, Daniel was surprised to find Eli sweeping leaves off the front porch. The simple domestic act seemed to transform the space, making it feel more like a home than it had in months. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said, climbing out of his truck. Eli leaned on the broom handle, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Wanted to earn my keep somehow." "How'd it go with the sheriff?" "He's going to review everything. It's a start." Daniel joined Eli on the porch, looking out at the quiet street. "You know, Grace's mother would be proud to see how far you've come." Eli's eyes misted slightly. "She was the first person who ever believed in me. Seems like that runs in the family." The rest of the day passed peacefully. When Grace returned from school, she found both men working on fixing a loose railing on the back steps. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket as they shared a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread. Later, as they sat in the living room, the TV playing softly in the background, Daniel looked at his unlikely household. Grace was curled up with a book, while Eli sketched quietly in a notebook Daniel had given him. The atmosphere was different from the tense uncertainty of previous days. There was hope now, a feeling that maybe everything would work out after all. Through the window, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. For the first time in days, the future didn't seem quite so daunting. They sat together in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but united in their shared hope for tomorrow. The evening settled around Daniel's modest home like a soft blanket, bringing with it the familiar chorus of crickets and the gentle rustling of leaves. Daniel stood in Grace's doorway, watching as she snuggled deeper into her covers, her math textbook still open beside her. "Time for sleep, sweetheart?" Daniel said, moving to collect the book. "Math will still be there in the morning." Grace yawned, but caught his hand. "Dad, do you think everything's going to work out? With Eli, I mean?" Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. "I hope so. That security camera footage could make a real difference." "He's good, Dad, I can tell." Grace's eyes were heavy with sleep, but her voice carried conviction. "Your mom always could see the best in people too," Daniel said softly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Get some rest now." He kissed her forehead, switched off the bedside lamp, and quietly closed her door. Through the window at the end of the hall, he could see Eli's silhouette on the front porch, sitting in one of the old wooden chairs Daniel had repaired last summer. The screen door creaked as Daniel stepped outside. The night air was cool and clean after the recent rains, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming jasmine from Mrs. Peterson's garden next door. "Mind if I join you?" Daniel asked, settling into the chair beside Eli. Eli shook his head, his eyes fixed on the distant tree line. "Your daughter?" he said after a moment. "She reminds me so much of Sarah, your wife. Same kind heart." Daniel's chest tightened at the mention of Sarah. "Yeah, she does. Sarah would have given you a chance too, you know. Second chances were kind of her specialty. At that youth center." "I never told her how much those few months meant," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. "She saw past everything, my clothes, where I came from, all of it. Just treated me like I was worth something. That's why I couldn't just drive past you in that storm," Daniel admitted. "Sarah would have stopped. And that security footage? She would have looked for it too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. A cool breeze stirred the trees, making shadows dance across the yard. "I've been running so long," Eli said quietly, "always looking over my shoulder, expecting the worst, these past couple days. It's the first time in years I've felt like maybe I could stop running." Daniel nodded, understanding more than he could say. We all deserve a chance to stand still, catch our breath, build something good. Even with this? Eli touched his neck where the gang tattoo marked his skin. "Most people see it and decide my whole story. Right there. That tattoo's part of your past, not your future," Daniel said firmly. "What matters is what you do from here." Eli's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if a weight had lifted, but then his posture suddenly stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. "Something wrong?" Daniel asked, following his gaze. Eli shook his head slowly, but his body remained tense. "Probably nothing, just old habits." But his eyes kept returning to a particular spot in the tree line, where the shadows seemed to shift and deepen. Years of survival instincts had honed his senses to danger, And right now, those instincts were screaming. "Think I'll turn in," Daniel said, stifling a yawn. "Got an early job tomorrow. You good out here?" "Yeah," Eli replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Thanks, Daniel. For everything." Daniel stood, stretching his tired muscles. "Get some rest. Things'll look better in the morning." Inside, Daniel moved through his nightly routine, checking the back door's deadbolt, making sure the kitchen windows were secure, setting the coffee maker for morning. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar sounds that usually brought comfort. Outside Eli's window, a branch swayed in the breeze, casting moving shadows on the wall. Or perhaps it wasn't the branch at all. In the darkness beyond the glass, something, or someone, watched and waited, their presence masked by the night's shadows. Eli remained on the porch, his body still but his senses alert, aware of movement in the trees that had nothing to do with the wind. The real attacker observed from his hidden vantage point, his heart racing with fear and anger. Every second Eli remained free was a threat, a chance for the truth to emerge. Daniel climbed the stairs to his bedroom, unaware of the dangerous game of cat and mouse playing out in the darkness around his home. He checked on Grace one last time, smiling at her peaceful expression, then closed and locked his own bedroom door, a habit from years of single parenthood. The house fell quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant song of crickets. But in the shadows outside, tension built like a gathering storm, invisible but powerful, waiting to break. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when Daniel grabbed his truck keys from the hook by the door. He'd promised Mrs. Henderson he'd fix her leaky faucet first thing, and the extra money would help with this week's groceries. Grace was still asleep upstairs. It was Saturday, after all, and Eli had settled into the guest room after a quiet breakfast of toast and coffee. "I'll be back in an hour, tops," Daniel told Eli, who nodded from his spot at the kitchen table. Grace usually sleeps late on weekends, but if she needs anything, "I'll keep an ear out," Eli assured him, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. The bruises on his face had started to fade to a dull yellow, and he moved with less pain now. Daniel hesitated at the door, then headed out. The neighborhood was peaceful, gardens still wet with dew, and birds calling their morning songs. Nobody would guess the tension that had gripped the community just days before. Inside Grace's bedroom, the morning light filtered through her curtains, casting gentle shadows on her sleeping face. The house creaked and settled, normal sounds that didn't disturb her rest, until a crash from downstairs jolted her awake. Grace sat up, her heart hammering. That wasn't the usual house noise. Another thud, followed by the distinct sound of breaking glass. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the carpet. "Eli?" she called softly, creeping to her bedroom door. No answer. More sounds from below, shuffling, a muffled curse, the scrape of furniture being moved. These weren't Eli's careful, considerate movements. Grace's hands trembled as she eased her door closed and back toward her closet. Her phone lay on the nightstand, and she grabbed it, ducking into the closet just as heavy footsteps started up the stairs. The closet was dark and smelled of laundry detergent. Grace pressed herself between hanging clothes, trying to steady her shaking fingers as she dialed her father's number. Each ring seemed to echo in the small space. "Grace?" Daniel's voice was tinged with concern. "Everything okay?" "Dad," she whispered, "someone's in the house." I heard breaking glass, and a shout from downstairs cut her off, followed by the unmistakable sound of a body hitting the floor. Grace bit back a whimper. "Grace, listen to me." Daniel's voice was urgent now. "Stay hidden. I'm calling the police and coming right home. Don't make a sound." The call ended, and Grace hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. Through the slats in the closet door, she could see her bedroom, morning sun streaming through the window, making everything look deceptively normal. Downstairs, chaos erupted. "Where is he?" a rough voice demanded. "I know this is where he's hiding. You need to leave." Eli's voice was calm but firm. "Now. You think I'm going to let you talk to the cops? Tell them what you saw?" The stranger's voice rose in anger. "I've worked too hard to let some ex-con ruin everything." A crash, the sound of breaking pottery, her mother's favorite vase. Grace realized with a pang, and then the unmistakable sounds of a struggle. Grunts of pain, the thud of fists meeting flesh, furniture scraping across floors. Grace pressed her hands over her ears, but she couldn't block out the violence below. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she prayed for her father to arrive, for help to come, for Eli to be okay. The fight moved through the house, from living room to kitchen, back to the entryway. Glass crunched under boots. Something heavy hit the wall hard enough to shake the pictures hanging in Grace's room. "You should have stayed away," the attacker snarled. "Should have let them think it was you." "I won't let you hurt anyone else." Eli's voice was strained but determined. Suddenly, new voices joined the fray. Sharp commands, the bang of the front door being thrown open. "Police! Freeze!" Grace's heart leaped with relief, but the next words made it plummet. "Get on the ground! Hands where we can see them!" "Wait." Eli's voice was urgent. "You don't understand. On the ground now." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut. Heavy boots on hardwood floors. Grace pushed open her closet door with trembling hands, creeping to her window. Below, 2 police cars sat in the driveway, lights flashing. Neighbors gathered on their lawns, pointing and whispering. Her father's truck screeched to a halt at the curb. Daniel jumped out, running toward the house just as officers led Eli out in handcuffs. Eli's face was bloody, his shirt torn, but he held himself straight, dignity intact, even in restraints. "Stop!" Daniel shouted. "You've got the wrong man." Grace flew down the stairs, nearly tripping in her haste. The living room was a disaster. Overturned furniture, broken glass, her mother's photos scattered across the floor. But she barely registered the destruction as she burst through the front door. "Dad!" she cried, running into his arms. Daniel caught her, holding her tight as they watched helplessly while officers pushed Eli into the back of a patrol car. The real attacker was nowhere to be seen. He must have slipped away in the chaos when the police arrived. "He was protecting me," Grace sobbed into her father's shirt. "The other man broke in, and Eli fought him to keep me safe. Dad, we have to tell them." "We will, sweetheart." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion as he stroked her hair. "We'll tell them everything." The patrol car's engine started, and Eli met their eyes through the window. Despite everything, he gave them a small, reassuring nod before the car pulled away, leaving Daniel and Grace standing in their torn-up front yard, holding each other as neighbors stared and whispered, and the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, indifferent to the injustice unfolding below. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows through the broken front window, highlighting the chaos inside Daniel's small home. Shattered glass glittered on the floor like cruel diamonds. The coffee table lay overturned, one leg splintered. Books and papers were scattered everywhere, silent witnesses to the violent struggle that had erupted just hours before. Daniel stood in the middle of his living room, hands trembling, as he picked up a fallen photo frame, the one of his late wife at the youth center. The glass was cracked, splitting her smile in two. He carefully placed it back on the shelf, his chest tight with guilt. Outside, the last police car pulled away, its red and blue lights no longer painting the walls in alternating colors. The neighbors had finally retreated to their homes, though Daniel could still see curtains twitching in nearby windows. Their judgment felt heavy, suffocating. Grace sat curled up on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She hadn't stopped shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Dad, you have to tell them. Eli protected me. He saved my life." Daniel ran his hands through his hair, remembering how he'd found Grace hiding in the upstairs closet, terrified but alive. "I know, sweetheart. I know he did. The man, the real attacker, he broke in through the kitchen door." Grace continued, her words tumbling out faster now. "I heard the noise and hid, just like you taught me, but he was looking for Eli, saying something about keeping quiet. When Eli saw him threatening to search upstairs, she swallowed hard. Eli didn't even hesitate. He jumped right in to keep him away from where I was hiding." The sheriff's words from earlier echoed in Daniel's mind. "We'll sort this out at the station. But right now, we've got a known offender, involved in a violent altercation. Protocol is protocol, Mr. Mercer." Daniel picked up his phone for the 5th time in the last hour, checking for any updates from the station. Nothing. He should have shown the security camera footage to the sheriff sooner, should have pushed harder when he first saw it, should have done something, anything, more. A soft knock at the door made them both jump. It was Mrs. Peterson from next door, holding a casserole dish. Her face was pinched with concern, and something else, fear. "I thought you might need." She trailed off, her eyes darting around the damaged room. "Daniel, is it true? They're saying that man you took in, his name is Eli," Grace interrupted, standing up. "And he protected me from the real criminal." Her voice cracked but held firm. Mrs. Peterson stepped back slightly, clutching her dish tighter. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing, Daniel. This whole situation, it's not good for the neighborhood." Not good at all. She set the dish on the porch and hurried away. Daniel closed the door softly, his shoulders sagging. The town's fear was a living thing now, growing and spreading like shadows at sunset. He could feel it pressing against his windows, seeping under his doors. In the kitchen, broken glass crunched under his boots as he swept. Grace insisted on helping, though her hands still trembled as she held the dustpan. They worked in silence, trying to restore order to their home piece by piece. The sheriff said they'd review the security footage. Daniel finally said, more to himself than to Grace, once they see that, they'll have to let him go. But what if they don't look at it soon enough? What if they don't believe it? Grace's voice was small but fierce. "Dad, you saw how they treated him. They didn't even listen when he tried to explain." Daniel remembered the look on Eli's face as they'd handcuffed him, not surprise or anger, but a deep, resigned sadness, as if he'd expected this all along, as if kindness always came with a price for people like him. The afternoon wore on. Daniel called the station twice more, only to be told the sheriff was reviewing the situation. He made Grace eat something, though neither of them had much appetite. The broken window let in a cool breeze that stirred the curtains restlessly. As evening approached, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, hands clasped tightly together, the same table where Eli had sat that morning, drinking coffee, helping Grace with her math homework, the same table where, just days ago, they'd shared a meal and tentative hope for the future. "Please," he whispered, his head bowed, "please help me make this right." The prayer felt inadequate, but it was all he had left. Guilt pressed down on his shoulders like a physical weight. He should have trusted his instincts about Eli sooner, should have fought harder against the town's prejudices, should have protected both Grace and Eli better. Grace's footsteps padded softly across the floor. She placed her hand on his shoulder, and together they sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by the remnants of violence and fear, but clinging to their determination to set things right. The kitchen clock ticked steadily onward, marking each moment Eli spent behind bars, while father and daughter kept their quiet vigil at the table where friendship had bloomed and trust had grown, praying for the strength to face whatever came next. The morning sun hadn't yet peeked over the horizon when Daniel slipped out of bed. He hadn't slept much anyway. His mind kept replaying the scene of Eli being led away in handcuffs, Grace's terrified face, and the mess of broken glass and overturned furniture that remained in his living room. He pulled on his worn work jacket and grabbed his truck keys. Grace was still sleeping, exhausted from yesterday's trauma. He'd asked Mrs. Peterson next door to keep an eye on her while he was gone. The elderly neighbor had been one of the few people who hadn't judged them for taking Eli in. Daniel's old pickup grumbled to life in the cool morning air. The folder on the passenger seat contained printouts of the gas station security camera screenshot, but he knew he needed more, much more. The gas station sat quiet and empty when he pulled into the cracked parking lot. A bell jingled as he pushed open the door, and the owner, Mr. Thompson, looked up from his newspaper. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the tired man's face. "We're not officially open yet," Mr. Thompson said, then recognized Daniel. "Oh, you're the handyman who fixed my storage room door last month." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir. I need your help with something important." He explained the situation, about Eli, the attack, and the screenshot that showed someone else was responsible. "Mister?" Thompson listened, running a hand through his gray hair. "The police already took a copy of that footage," he said. "I know, but they're not looking at it the right way. They see what they expect to see." Daniel leaned forward. "Please, could you show me the full video? There might be something they missed." Mr. Thompson hesitated, then sighed. "Give me a minute." He led Daniel to a small back office crammed with monitors. The footage was grainy but clear enough. They watched it 3 times, the tall figure with the distinctive limp entering the frame, looking around suspiciously, then leaving quickly. "See that limp?" Daniel pointed. "Eli doesn't walk like that, and look at the height difference when he passes the height marker by the door." Mr. Thompson nodded slowly. "You're right. This fellow's a good 4 inches taller than your friend." He turned to his computer and started clicking. "I'll make you a copy of the full video." "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. "This means more than you know." Back in his truck, Daniel checked his phone. Officer Martinez, one of the younger deputies, who'd been at his house yesterday, had texted him. Fingerprints collected from broken window and overturned furniture. Processing started. That was good news. The real attacker had left plenty of evidence behind during the struggle with Eli. But Daniel needed more. He pulled up to St. Mary's Hospital, where the first incident had occurred. It took some asking around, but he finally found Sarah Chin, the nurse Eli had protected during the original attack. She was just finishing her shift, dark circles under her eyes from the night's work. When Daniel mentioned Eli's name, her tired expression changed to one of concern. They arrested him? She shook her head. But he saved me. That other man, the tall one with the limp, he tried to grab my purse in the parking lot. Mr. Navarro intervened. He got hurt protecting me. Would you be willing to make an official statement? Daniel asked. The police need to hear this directly from you. Sarah didn't hesitate. Of course. Let me change out of my scrubs first. They drove to the police station together. Sarah's statement was detailed and clear, describing how Eli had pushed her out of the way when the real attacker had pulled a knife, how Eli had received the wound Daniel had later bandaged, how the actual perpetrator had fled limping into the night. The desk sergeant typed it all up, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. When they finished, he promised to get the statement to the detective handling the case immediately. Back in his truck, Daniel organized everything they'd gathered: the full security footage from the gas station, Sarah's official statement, and the text about the fingerprint processing. He added the original screenshot and his own written account of finding Eli that first rainy night. The sun was setting by the time he pulled into his driveway. His muscles ached from tension and exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of hope now. The folder beside him contained real evidence, proof that could help clear Eli's name. Through the front window, he could see Grace sitting at the kitchen table, working on her homework under Mrs. Peterson's watchful eye. The broken window had been temporarily covered with plywood, a stark reminder of yesterday's violence. Daniel gathered the folder and stepped out of his truck. The weight of the evidence felt solid in his hands, not just papers and statements, but the beginning of a path to making things right. He'd failed Eli once by not acting sooner. He wouldn't fail him again. Inside, Grace looked up from her textbook. Did you find anything that can help Eli? Daniel held up the folder and managed a small smile. I think so, sweetheart. I really think so. Mrs. Peterson squeezed his arm as she gathered her things to leave. You're doing the right thing, Daniel. That young man protected our Grace. Now it's our turn to protect him. After she left, Daniel sat heavily at the kitchen table, spreading out the Grace, contents of the folder. Grace moved closer, looking at the security camera stills and reading Sarah's statement. This proves he's innocent, she said firmly. Daniel nodded, staring at the evidence before him. Tomorrow he would take everything to the detective in charge of the case. Tomorrow they would start working to free Eli. But for now, he let himself feel the first real hope since watching his friend being led away in handcuffs. The folder lay open on the table, its contents illuminated by the warm kitchen light. Each piece of paper representing another step toward justice, another chance to right a wrong, another way to help someone who had risked everything to protect his daughter. The old town hall's wooden floors creaked under Grace's feet as she paced near the entrance. Her hands fidgeted with the carefully written note cards she'd stayed up late preparing. Daniel watched his daughter from nearby, his heart aching with a mixture of worry and pride. You don't have to do this, sweetheart, he said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. We can find another way. Grace shook her head, her jaw set with determination despite her trembling hands. Mom always said that staying quiet when something's wrong is the same as agreeing with it. I have to try, Dad. The hall was filling quickly. Familiar faces from their small town filed in: the grocery store clerk, teachers from Grace's school, the librarian who always saved the newest mystery novels for her. But today, their usual warm smiles were replaced with tight lips and worried eyes. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, his round face flushed as he called the emergency town meeting to order. The wooden benches creaked as people settled in, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Friends and neighbors, the mayor began, we're here today to address the growing concerns about public safety in our community. Recent events have left many of us feeling uncertain and afraid. Daniel's stomach nodded as several heads turned toward him. He'd heard the whispers, seen the suspicious glances. Taking in Eli had made them targets of the town's fear. Mrs. Jenkins, who ran the coffee shop, stood first. My customers are scared to come in after dark now. We've never had to worry like this before. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mr. Peterson, the hardware store owner, spoke next. We need increased police patrols, maybe a neighborhood watch program. We can't have dangerous criminals hiding in our midst. The words, dangerous criminals, hung in the air like poison. Daniel saw Grace's shoulders tense, her knuckles white around her note cards. The man they arrested? The one with that gang tattoo? Someone called out. I heard he was staying with the Mercers, right under our noses. More voices joined in, fear feeding fear. Daniel felt the weight of their judgment, but it was nothing compared to the courage he saw building in Grace's eyes. Before he could stop her, Grace was moving toward the front of the room. Her sneakers seemed to echo with each step as conversations died away. She reached the podium, having to stand on tiptoes to reach the microphone. My name is Grace Mercer, she began, her voice quavering slightly. And I need to tell you about the man you're all so afraid of. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Daniel moved closer to the front, positioning himself where Grace could see him, offering silent support. 2 days ago, a man broke into our house. Grace continued, her voice growing stronger. He came in through the kitchen window. I was upstairs, and I heard the glass break. She paused, taking a deep breath. I was so scared I could barely breathe. I hid in my closet and called my dad. Daniel saw several mothers in the audience draw closer to their own children, their faces softening with empathy. But Eli, the man you're all calling dangerous, he was there. He didn't run away, he didn't hide. Grace's voice cracked. Slightly, but she pressed on. He confronted the real attacker. He put himself between that man and the stairs leading to where I was hiding. The silence in the room deepened. Daniel noticed Mrs. Thompson, the mayor's wife, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Eli got hurt protecting me, Grace said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. He could have just left. He could have saved himself, but he didn't. He stayed to keep me safe. She shuffled her note cards, but then set them aside, speaking directly from her heart. My mom used to work with troubled teens at the youth center. She always said that people are more than their worst mistakes or the labels others put on them. Eli knew my mom back then. She helped him once, and now he helped me. Daniel saw several of the older residents exchange glances. Many of them had known his late wife and her work at the youth center. The man who actually attacked people in town is in custody now, thanks to Eli, Grace continued. But Eli's still in jail because people saw his tattoo and made assumptions. They didn't wait to learn the truth. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of neighbors she'd known all her life. Is that who we want to be? A town that judges people without knowing their whole story? That turns away someone in need because we're afraid of what they look like? The silence that followed was different from before, less hostile, more thoughtful. Daniel saw people shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some looking down at their hands, others exchanging uncertain glances. My mom always said that courage isn't about not being scared. Grace's voice softened. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Eli showed that kind of courage when he protected me. My dad showed it when he stopped to help someone everyone else had driven past. She straightened her shoulders, her final words ringing clear in the hushed room. Maybe now it's time for our town to show some courage. 2. The silence that fell over the town hall was complete. Daniel watched as Grace stepped down from the podium, her hands still shaking but her head held high. As she walked back to him, he saw the impact of her words reflected in the faces around them, doubt replacing certainty, compassion, challenging fear, and the first stirrings of shame in eyes that had been so quick to judge. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse parking lot as Daniel's truck pulled up to the sheriff's office. His hands were tight on the steering wheel, the manila folder of evidence sitting heavy on the seat between him and Grace. The tension from the town meeting still hung in the air, but now there was purpose behind their movements. You did so well back there, Daniel said softly as he put the truck in park. Your mother would have been proud. Grace managed a small smile, though her hands were still shaking slightly from speaking in front of so many people. I just told the small truth. They walked together into the sheriff's office, where the air conditioning hummed steadily against the Tennessee heat. The receptionist looked up, recognition crossing her face. Their small town meant everyone knew about recent events. Sheriff Hawthorne's expecting you, she said, gesturing toward his office. Daniel knocked on the doorframe. Sheriff Hawthorne sat behind his desk, his expression guarded but attentive. The office smelled of coffee and old paperwork, with afternoon light filtering through dusty Venetian blinds. Mr. Mercer, the sheriff nodded. Grace. He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "I understand you have some evidence to present." Daniel placed the folder on the desk and began laying out its contents methodically. First, the complete security footage from Jim's gas station. He slid the USB drive across the desk. It shows the real attacker clearly, his height, his limp, everything that doesn't match Eli. Sheriff Hawthorne plugged the Bandaged drive into his computer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the footage. The black and white video clearly showed a man significantly taller than Eli, moving with an unmistakable limp as he fled the scene. "Here's Mrs. Peterson's sworn statement," Daniel continued, placing a notarized document on the desk. "She confirms that Eli protected her during the first incident, not attacked her. She was too scared to come forward earlier, but she's willing to testify now." The sheriff picked up the statement, reading carefully. His expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his professional mask. And finally, Daniel said, pulling out the last document, "The fingerprint analysis from my house, the prints found on our broken window and in our living room, they match your suspect in custody, not Eli." Grace leaned forward. "Sheriff Hawthorne, Eli saved my life. The real attacker would have." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "Eli put himself between me and danger. He's a good person who's been wrongly accused his whole life because of how he looks." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, studying each piece of evidence. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, removing his reading glasses. "The man we arrested at your house," he began slowly, "has been talking. Once we showed him the security footage and fingerprint results, he started getting nervous about additional charges. He picked up his phone. He's confessed to everything, both attacks and the break-in at your home." Daniel felt his shoulders relax slightly, though tension still coiled in his stomach. "Then you know Eli's innocent?" "Yes," the sheriff admitted, his voice carrying a note of regret. "Yes, I do." He punched in a number on his phone, waiting as it rang. "This is Sheriff Hawthorne. I'm authorizing the immediate release of Eli Navarro. All charges are being dropped." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'll handle the paperwork myself." Grace's eyes filled with tears of relief, and Daniel reached over to squeeze her hand. The sheriff hung up the phone and looked at them both. "Mr. Mercer, Grace, I apologize for my part in this. Sometimes we let our preconceptions cloud our judgment. Your daughter's speech at the town meeting, combined with this evidence," he gestured to the folder. "Well, it's clear we made a serious mistake with Mr. Navarro." "They're processing his release now?" Daniel asked. The sheriff nodded. "Yes. He should be out within the hour." He looked down at his desk, then back up at them. "You know, in all my years as sheriff, I've learned that the hardest part of this job isn't catching the bad guys, it's admitting when we've caught the wrong ones. The concrete walls of the county jail cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun." Daniel and Grace sat on a worn wooden bench outside the release area, their shoulders touching for comfort. The metal door's hinges creaked occasionally as officers passed through, making Grace jump each time. Daniel wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "It shouldn't be much longer now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his own nervousness. His leg bounced with restless energy as they waited. Grace fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "Do you think he's okay in there?" she asked, her voice small but concerned. "I mean, after everything that happened, Eli's strong?" Daniel assured her, though his own worry showed in the lines around his eyes. He glanced at his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The sheriff had called over an hour ago to start the release process, but bureaucracy moved slowly, even when correcting an injustice. A young deputy pushed through the door, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Mercer?" he called out, scanning the nearly empty waiting area. Daniel stood quickly, Grace following suit. "Yes, that's us. Mr. Navarro will be out shortly. We're just finishing the paperwork." "The deputies?" Expression was apologetic, perhaps feeling the weight of their mistake. Minutes crawled by like hours. Grace paced the small space, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Daniel remained standing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets to hide their trembling. Finally, the heavy door opened again. Eli emerged, squinting slightly in the sunlight. His face bore fresh bruises, and he moved stiffly, but his eyes were clear and alert. He wore the same clothes from the day of his arrest, now wrinkled from his time in custody. "Eli," Grace called out, starting forward before catching herself, uncertain if he wanted space. Eli's tired face broke into a gentle smile. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He looked at Daniel, emotion flickering across his features. Daniel! The three stood in a triangle of awkward silence until Daniel stepped forward, extending his hand. Eli took it, and Daniel pulled him into a careful hug, mindful of his injuries. "I'm sorry, Daniel," said, his voice thick. "I should have trusted you completely from the start. Should have done more, sooner." Eli shook his head as they separated. "You did more than anyone else would have. You opened your home to me when others just drove by. You gave me a chance when the whole town was ready to condemn me." Grace couldn't contain herself any longer. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Eli's waist, causing him to wince slightly but return the embrace. "You saved my life," she said firmly, looking up at him. "And now we saved yours back. That's what family does, right?" Eli's eyes grew misty at her words. He patted her shoulder gently, seemingly at a loss for words. Daniel pulled his truck keys from his pocket. "Let's get you home," he said, then caught himself. "I mean, if you want to come back to our place, you're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered." "I'd like that," Eli replied quietly. "If you're sure it's okay." They walked together to Daniel's truck. Their long descent, steps slow to match Eli's careful pace. The late afternoon sun painted everything in warm golden light, making even the stark jail walls look softer. Grace climbed into the middle seat, leaving Eli the passenger side. As Daniel started the engine, she spoke up. "Dad made your bed up fresh this morning, and I helped clean up the guest room." "You didn't have to do that," Eli said, but his voice was grateful. "We wanted to," Daniel replied, pulling out of the parking lot. "We knew you'd be coming home today." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the sun sinking toward the horizon ahead of them. The familiar streets looked different somehow, more welcoming, more full of possibility. "Thank you," Eli said suddenly, his voice carrying the weight of days spent wondering if anyone would believe in him. "Both of you. For everything." Daniel glanced over, seeing the emotion in Eli's face. "You don't have to thank us. We're just setting things right." Grace reached over and squeezed Eli's hand. "Besides, you're stuck with us now. Mom always said family sticks together, even when it's family you choose." Eli squeezed back gently, a small smile tugging at his lips despite his bruises. The truck continued down the quiet streets as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, its warm light washing over the three of them as they headed home together. Golden morning light spilled across the quiet streets of the neighborhood, warming the dewy grass and casting long shadows behind the row of modest houses. Daniel stood on his front porch, coffee mug in hand, watching as early risers walked their dogs or collected their morning papers. Eli sat in the weathered rocking chair beside him, his hands wrapped around his own steaming mug. The bruises from his jail ordeal were fading to yellowish green, but his eyes held a new brightness that hadn't been there before. He looked more at peace, like a man who could finally breathe freely. "Morning, Daniel. Morning." Eli, Mrs. Peterson, their next-door neighbor, called out as she crossed her yard toward them. Just days ago, she had been one of the first to spread worried whispers about the stranger in their midst. Now she carried a covered dish in her hands, her face pink with embarrassment. "I, made my famous apple cobbler," she said, climbing the porch steps. "I wanted to say, well, I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions, for not being a better neighbor." Daniel accepted the dish with a gentle smile. "Thank you, Margaret. That's very kind." "It wasn't right how we all acted," she continued, wringing her hands. "Fear makes people do foolish things, doesn't it?" Eli stood slowly, his movements still careful from his injuries. "We all make mistakes," he said quietly. "What matters is learning from them." Mrs. Peterson's eyes welled with tears. She reached out and patted Eli's arm. "You're a good man, Mr. Navarro. I should have seen that sooner." Throughout the morning, more neighbors approached the porch. Mr. Jenkins from across the street brought fresh tomatoes from his garden. The Ramirez family came with their teenage son, who sheepishly admitted he had been one of those spreading rumors at school about Grace's family harboring a criminal. Not everyone came around, of course. The Hendersons drew their curtains tight when Daniel and Eli walked past their house. Old Mr. Williams muttered under his breath and turned away at the sight of them. But the tide of opinion had shifted noticeably. Grace emerged from the house around mid-morning, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She beamed at the sight of so many neighbors, actually talking with her father and Eli instead of avoiding them. "Would anyone like some coffee?" she offered, proud to play hostess. "We just made a fresh pot." As Grace went inside to fetch cups, a woman in a crisp blue blazer walked up the sidewalk. Daniel recognized Sarah Chin, the director of the local youth center. She carried herself with professional authority, but her expression was warm as she approached. "Mr. Mercer, Mr. Navarro," she greeted them. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Daniel assured her. "Please, join us." Sarah accepted a cup of coffee from Grace when she returned. "I've been following everything that happened," she said, "and I've been especially moved by how you protected Grace during that break-in, Mr. Navarro." Eli shifted uncomfortably at the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sarah said firmly, "not everyone would have. And from what I understand, you've been a positive influence on Grace in other ways too." Grace nodded eagerly. "He helped me deal with some kids who were being mean at school. He taught me that their words only have the power I give them." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here. We work with a lot of troubled teens at the youth center. Kids who've had rough starts, who feel labeled or misunderstood. Kids who could benefit from meeting someone who's faced similar challenges and come out stronger." Eli's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "You want me to talk to them?" "More than that," Sarah said. "I'd like you to consider becoming a mentor. These kids need someone who understands their struggles firsthand, someone who can show them there's always hope for a different path." Daniel watched Eli carefully. He could see the mixture of emotions playing across his friend's face: surprise, uncertainty, and something like cautious hope. Mrs. Peterson, who had lingered on the porch, spoke up. "You'd be wonderful at it, Eli. Look how you've helped Grace." Other neighbors added their encouragement. Even the Ramirez boy, who had been so quick to judge before, said, "That would be really cool, sir." Eli looked at Daniel, who gave him an encouraging nod. Then he glanced at Grace, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "The kids at the center," Eli said slowly. "They deserve better than judgment based on appearances or past mistakes. They deserve a chance to be seen for who they really are." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly why we need you." Eli took a deep breath. "I could. Come by tomorrow, see the place, meet some of the kids?" "That would be perfect," Sarah said, pulling out her business card. "How about 10 o'clock?" 10 o'clock. Eli agreed, accepting the card. Something in his expression had shifted, as if he was seeing a new purpose unfold before him. Grace hugged him impulsively. "You're going to be amazing!" The neighbors dispersed gradually, heading home with lighter hearts than when they'd arrived. Each farewell carried undertones of gratitude and restored connection, as if the morning had helped heal not just individual relationships, but the fabric of the community itself. The youth center bustled with activity on the bright morning, its worn but well-maintained basketball court echoing with the sound of bouncing balls and children's laughter. Inside the main room, metal folding chairs scraped against linoleum floors as teenagers settled in, their curious eyes fixed on Eli, who stood at the front with his hands clasped together. Daniel and Grace sat near the back, watching as Eli shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The nervousness in his stance was visible only to those who knew him well. The room gradually quieted, the last whispers fading into attentive silence. "I wasn't much older than some of you when I first got into trouble," Eli began, his voice soft but carrying clearly through the room. "My family didn't have much money. We lived in a tough neighborhood. I thought being tough was the only way to survive." A few teens nodded, recognition flickering across their faces. One boy in the front row leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I made choices that seemed smart at the time," Eli continued, unconsciously touching his arm where the gang tattoo lay hidden beneath his long-sleeved shirt. "But those choices led me down a path that nearly destroyed my life." Grace watched as several students exchanged glances. She recognized that look, the same one she'd seen in the mirror during her darkest days after losing her mom. "The thing about bad choices," Eli said, pacing slowly, "is that they don't just affect you, they hurt everyone who cares about you. And sometimes they mark you in ways that follow you forever." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the tattoo that had caused so much fear and prejudice. Several gasps echoed through the room. "This wasn't my choice," he explained, his voice steady despite the painful memory. "But I had put myself in a position where others could force their choices on me. That's what happens when you give up control of your life to people who don't care about your future." Daniel noticed how the teens' initial wariness had transformed into genuine interest. Even the usually distracted kids in the back corner were paying attention now. But here's what I learned, Eli continued, a slight smile warming his face. It's never too late to change your story. A few days ago, I was lost and hurt, convinced nobody would ever see past this mark on my arm. Then two people chose to see me as a human being, not just a tattoo. He gestured toward Daniel and Grace, and several heads turned to look at them. Grace felt her cheeks warm but sat up straighter, proud to be associated with Eli's story of redemption. They showed me what real strength looks like, Eli said. It's not about being tough or scary. It's about having the courage to trust, to be kind when others aren't, to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. A girl in the middle row raised her hand. But what if people already expect you to be bad? Like they've already decided who you are? Eli nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's exactly what I faced. But here's the truth. Other people's expectations don't define you. Your choices do. Every single day, you get to decide who you want to be. The youth center director, Mrs. Thompson, stood quietly in the doorway, watching as Eli connected with the teens in a way her regular speakers never had. These kids recognized authenticity when they saw it. Look, Eli said, his voice growing passionate. I know some of you are facing tough situations at home. Maybe you're dealing with bullies, or poverty, or people who want to pull you into their troubles. But you have something I didn't have at your age. People who believe in you, right here in this center. A heavy silence fell over the room as his words sank in. Even the distant sounds of basketball seemed to fade away. I'm not here to lecture you, Eli continued softly. I'm here to tell you that your life matters, your choices matter, and it's never too late to choose a better path. As Eli finished speaking, hands shot up around the room. For the next 30 minutes, he answered questions with honest, straightforward responses that respected the teens' intelligence while acknowledging their struggles. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward as the session wound down. Thank you, Eli, she said, then turned to address the group. I hope you'll all be happy to know that Mr. Navarro has agreed to join us part-time as a mentor. Surprised murmurs and scattered applause filled the room. Eli's eyes widened slightly. They had discussed the possibility, but this was the first official announcement. Really? The boy from the front row asked, hope clear in his voice. Really? Eli confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. If you'll have me. As the teens filed out for their next activities, many stopped to thank Eli or ask when he'd be back. Daniel watched from his seat, remembering the desperate man he'd found in the rain just days ago. The transformation was remarkable. When the room had cleared, except for a few stragglers, Eli walked over to where Daniel and Grace sat. Thank you both for coming, he said quietly. We wouldn't have missed it, Grace replied, standing to give him a quick hug. Want to step outside for a minute? Daniel asked, noting how overwhelmed Eli looked. Eli nodded, and they made their way through the building to the side door, stepping out into the morning sunshine. The basketball court was visible around the corner, the sounds of playing children creating a hopeful backdrop. I never thought, Eli started, then had to stop, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat and tried again. I never thought I'd have a chance at a real future, one where I could be honest about who I am and still be accepted. Daniel watched his friend struggle to find words for what he was feeling. The man who had once been so guarded now stood with his heart open, transformed by the simple act of being believed in. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of honeysuckle across Daniel's front yard, mingling with the earthy smell of freshly watered grass and the faint perfume from Grace's small flower garden. The late afternoon sun painted everything in warm golden hues, its rays catching the wind chimes Grace had hung last summer, the ones with the little angels that tinkled like church bells whenever the air stirred. The past week had brought more healing than Daniel could have imagined possible, each day revealing new layers of peace he'd forgotten could exist. Inside his modest kitchen, Daniel carefully wrapped a homemade apple pie in aluminum foil, making sure the edges were sealed tight to keep the warmth in. Grace had helped him bake it that morning, her flour-dusted hands rolling out the dough just like her mother used to do. The familiar scent of cinnamon and nutmeg brought back memories, Sarah laughing as she tried to keep young Grace from sneaking tastes of the filling, the kitchen filled with warmth and love on Sunday mornings. But for the first time in years, these memories didn't sting quite as sharply. Instead, they felt like gentle reminders of joy that had been and could be again. Need help with that? Eli asked, appearing in the doorway. He wore a clean button-down shirt that Daniel had given him, light blue cotton that brought out the warmth in his dark eyes. The sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms marked by honest work. The tattoo that had once caused so much fear was visible, but somehow it looked different now. More like a battle scar from a war he'd survived than a mark of shame he had to carry. "I think I've got it," Daniel replied, smiling as he tucked the foil edges under the pie plate, "though you could grab that basket of rolls from the counter." "Grace, time to go," Daniel called toward the stairs. Grace bounded down the stairs 2 at a time, her yellow sundress swishing around her knees like sunshine caught in fabric. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore the small cross necklace her mother had given her for her 13th birthday. "I can't wait for everyone to try, Mrs. Johnson's famous potato salad," she said, practically bouncing with excitement as she helped gather the dishes. "She promised to bring it after I helped her weed her garden yesterday. Did you know she grows 17 different kinds of tomatoes?" The church parking lot was already full when they arrived. Cars parked at angles that would have driven the old church committee crazy, but somehow felt perfect for tonight's casual gathering. Paper lanterns hung between the old oak trees, swaying gently in the evening air like colored stars waiting for darkness to truly shine. Picnic tables dotted the lawn, their red and white checkered tablecloths weighted down with casseroles, pies, and countless other homemade dishes. The sight of so many neighbors gathered together, talking and laughing, their voices mixing with the distant sound of children playing, made Daniel's heart swell with something he'd almost forgotten how to feel: community belonging. "Eli, over here," called Pastor Jennings, waving from near the punch bowl with its crystal ladle catching the last rays of sunlight. His kind face was creased with genuine pleasure as he gestured toward their reserved spot. "We saved you 3 a spot at our table. Mary's been asking about you all week." As they made their way through the crowd, Daniel noticed how different the atmosphere was from just a week ago. Where there had been suspicious glances and whispered conversations behind cupped hands, now there were warm smiles and genuine welcomes. Mrs. Thompson, who had once slipped that warning note under his door with shaking fingers, now pressed a warm container of her famous cornbread into Eli's hands with a grandmotherly smile. "You have to try this while it's still warm," she insisted, patting his arm with genuine affection. "And thank you again for helping fix my screen door yesterday. Harold's been meaning to get to it for months, but you had it done in 20 minutes. It hasn't squeaked once since." They settled at a table with Pastor Jennings and his wife Mary, along with the Andersons and the Williamses families that had been cornerstones of the community for decades. Grace immediately launched into animated conversation with their teenage daughter Emma about their upcoming school play, her hands gesturing excitedly as she described costume ideas. Daniel watched as Eli easily joined a discussion about the local baseball team's chances this season, talking with some of the men who had been most skeptical of him initially. Now they leaned in to hear his thoughts on batting averages and pitching rotations. The food was passed around family style, plates were filled to overflowing, and conversation flowed as naturally as water finding its course. Daniel found himself sharing stories about his late wife's community work, surprised by how good it felt to speak about Sarah openly without the sharp edge of grief cutting his words short. "She always said everyone deserves a second chance," he said softly, catching Eli's eye across the word. Table loaded with green bean casserole and corn salad. "She used to volunteer at the shelter downtown, helping folks get back on their feet. She was right about second chances. Sounds like she was a wise woman," Mary Jennings said gently, covering Daniel's hand with her own weathered one. "Her kindness lives on in both of you." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reflected off the church's white steeple, children chased fireflies across the church lawn while their parents cleared plates and packed up leftovers for neighbors to take home. Several people stopped by to thank Eli for his recent help with various projects around town, fixing Mrs. Patterson's broken fence, helping the Garcias paint their garage, installing new gutters for the elderly, Mr. Rodriguez down on Maple Street. He had thrown himself into community service with quiet determination, never asking for payment, simply showing up wherever hands were needed. "You know, Mrs. Anderson said, her eyes twinkling behind her wire-rimmed glasses as she handed Daniel a container of leftover fried chicken, "having Eli around has reminded us all what community really means. We got so caught up in our fears and forgot about grace, both kinds." She glanced meaningfully at Grace, who was helping stack empty pie plates. "Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to show us what we've been missing." The drive home was peaceful, the car filled with comfortable silence and the lingering warmth of the evening. Leftovers sat in containers on the back seat, along with a small potted plant Mrs. Henderson had insisted Grace take home. When they pulled into the driveway, none of them seemed ready to go inside just yet. The house looked welcoming, with its porch light glowing softly, but the evening air was too perfect to waste. Instead, they settled on the front porch steps, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky like tiny promises being lit one by one. Grace leaned against Daniel's shoulder, yawning contentedly, her head fitting perfectly in that spot that had been hers since she was small. "Remember when you first brought Eli home, Dad?" Grace said thoughtfully, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "During that awful storm? The rain was coming down so hard I thought our roof might cave in." Daniel nodded, thinking about how much had changed since that rain-soaked night when everything seemed dark and impossible. "Sometimes the hardest choices turn out to be the most important ones," he said, his arm tightening around his daughter's shoulders. "I was scared that night, scared of making the wrong decision. I keep thinking about what Mom would say if she were here," Grace continued, her voice taking on that dreamy quality it got when she was remembering. "I think she'd be proud of us, all of us. She always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to love the way they loved." Eli sat quietly for a moment, his calloused hands clasped in his lap, his dark eyes reflecting the first stars. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Your mother's kindness saved my life once," he said softly, the words carrying years of gratitude. "When I was young and angry and making all the wrong choices, she saw something in me worth saving, and now her family has done it again. Some debts you can never repay, you can only pass them forward." Daniel watched as their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, walked by with her small terrier, both of them moving slowly, but with purpose. She waved warmly to all three of them, calling out, "Good evening, dear ones," with genuine affection. The simple gesture spoke volumes about how much had changed. His home, once a place of quiet grief, where neighbors worried about disturbing his solitude, now felt truly alive again. The porch light cast a gentle glow around them, and crickets chirped their evening song from the garden Grace had started tending again, the same one where Sarah used to grow tomatoes and snap peas. "You know," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence that wrapped around them like a warm blanket, "I thought I was just helping a stranger that night, just doing what felt right in the moment. I never imagined we were actually healing ourselves." Grace smiled, reaching out to squeeze both men's hands, creating a circle of connection on the porch steps. "Maybe that's how healing works best," she said with wisdom that sometimes surprised Daniel. "When we stop thinking about ourselves and just help each other. Like Mom always said, love grows when you give it away." They sat together as evening settled fully around them, three lives that had become unexpectedly but permanently intertwined. The wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze, their gentle melody a reminder of how life's music could play again after long periods of silence. Each of them had given something: trust, forgiveness, acceptance, second chances, and each had received something far greater in return. A family reborn, a community healed, a future bright with possibility. The street lamps flickered on one by one, casting pools of warm light along their quiet street, like lanterns marking a path forward. In homes all around them, families were settling in for the night, many of them carrying leftover dishes and renewed hearts from the evening's gathering. Children were being tucked into beds with stories of the fun they'd had, and adults were reflecting on conversations that had meant more than small talk. Daniel looked at Grace, her face peaceful in the growing darkness, still beautiful in the way that reminded him so much of Sarah. He looked at Eli, finally at ease in his own skin, no longer carrying himself like a man expecting rejection at every turn, and he felt profound gratitude for the mysterious ways Grace worked in people's lives, sometimes through storms, sometimes through strangers, sometimes through the simple courage to do what's right, even when you're afraid. The simple act of stopping his truck in the rain that night had set in motion changes he could never have imagined. One moment of mercy, offered despite fear and doubt, and all the reasonable voices saying to keep driving, had rippled outward like stones thrown in still water. It had touched not just three lives, but an entire community, reminding everyone what it meant to be neighbors, to be human, to be whole. As they sat together on the porch steps, their comfortable silence spoke of belonging, of healing, of home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to love well, but tonight was perfect, just as it was three hearts that had found each other when they needed it most, surrounded by a community that had remembered how to see with grace instead of fear. The stars grew brighter as the last traces of sunset faded, and somewhere in the distance, Church bells chimed the hour with the same gentle rhythm as Grace's wind chimes. Everything was exactly as it should be. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel Mercer, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.